Sure. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. It's a pleasure to see so many faces here. We're really excited about our speakers this evening, and we're really excited to be celebrating Indigenous design here at CAPLA. So with that, I would like to introduce Lacilia. She's the president of our Indigenous Society of Architects, Planners, and Designers Student Club, which is now in its third year. We are the first chapter outside of UNM of this national organization, and we are very proud of it. So with that, Lacilia will do the introductions. Thank you.
Okay. Well, first off, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the land that we're gathered on. We are on the ancestral and present-day lands of the To'ona O'odham and the Yaqui peoples, whose relationship to this land continues to this day. But I also want to go a step further than acknowledgement. Land acknowledgement on its own, it can become routine, something that we just say and get past. So I want to invite us to deeply consider what it really means to be here. To be in a place that has been cared for, understood, and lived within deep relationship long before any of us arrived. And to not just acknowledge the land, but to be accountable to it. My name is Lacilia Panzarea, and I'm the president of the Indigenous Society of Architecture, Planning and Design here at the University of Arizona. The symposium is more than just an event. It's a call to gather and a call to listen. And it's a call to reimagine what design can be when it's grounded in relationship rather than extraction. For a long time, conversations around sustainability, especially that in academia and of professional spaces, have been shaped through the Western lens. A framework that tends to separate people, land, and resources into categories rather than thinking of them in a holistic manner. But Indigenous ways of knowing have never worked like that. We understand the land as living, as relational, as something we are accountable to, not something that we control. Indigenous perspectives are not new, and they are not emerging. They have always been. Indigenous communities are the original stewards, designers, planners, and caretakers of these lands, and because of that, we carry knowledge rooted in reciprocity, balance, and relationship, not just with each other, but with the earth and everything that sustains us. This symposium is about asserting space for that knowledge, about repositioning Indigenous voices, not as an addition to the conversation, but as leaders within it. Spaces of equity and exchange don't always exist for Indigenous people, so we decided to create that space. This symposium is about empowering Indigenous people to shape our futures on our own terms. Additionally, this symposium is an invitation to everyone here to bring Indigenous ways into their thinking and into their designs. As designers, planners, and future practitioners, we hold power. And with that power comes the responsibility to ensure resilient futures that we may never personally see ourselves. As you hear from our presenters tonight and exchange ideas with the community gathered here today, I invite you to consider the following. What is your relationship to the land that you're building on? What does it mean to design not just for people, but for all living things? And what does it look like to approach design with humility? Tonight, we welcome speakers who are championing a shift in our professions, away from short-term outcomes and towards long-term relationships, from ownership to stewardship, from control to reciprocity. People who understand that community and environmental sustainability are not separate goals, but they are inseparable. Tonight, we have speaker Johnpaul Jones. He is from the Choctaw Nation and has had a distinguished 52-year career as an architect and a founding partner of Jones & Jones. His designs have won widespread acclaim for their reverence for the earth and their deep respect for their regional architectural traditions and native landscapes, and their capacity to deepen understanding of diverse people and culture of America. As an AIA Fellow, his work has also been recognized with numerous honors, including including the Pietro Belushi Distinguished Profession in 2011, the Island Treasure Award from Bainbridge Island Arts and Humanity Council in 2013, the Washington State Governor's Heritage Award in 2014, and the National Humanities Medal from the National Endowment for the Humanities in 2014, which was conferred by President Barack Obama. Our next speaker, Dr. Jojola, is a member of the Pueblo of Isleta and the founder of the Director of Indigenous Design and Planning Institute at the University of New Mexico School of Architecture. Dr. Jojola has worked with communities throughout the Southwest and internationally, developing culturally informed approaches to community development that translate into Indigenous culture. And they're deeply attuned to the concepts of the place and the home and the time that they're being built. Dr. Jojola's 7th-generation model challenges us to think beyond 10, 20, 30 years. It challenges us to think into the generations ahead. Wanda Dalla Costa is a member of the Saddle Lake Cree Nation, a fellow of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada, and a member of the AIA. She is the founder and principal of Tawa Architecture Collective, a cross-border design practice licensed both in Canada and the United States, which is not an easy feat. Wanda is the founding director of the Indigenous Design Collaborative, a community-driven design and research center. Her work has been recognized internationally, and she is a Yerba Buena Center for the Arts 100 honoree, a distinction acknowledging cultural leaders who are reshaping design and social equity. I want to conclude this with deep expression of gratitude to everyone who made today possible. To Athena Steen for hosting this morning's workshop and sharing your perspectives on the living qualities of natural materials. To my community, those who have supported, guided, and shaped me in ways that made this possible. To Laura Carr for your mentorship and your belief in this vision. To our ISAPD board, to our past presidents, Robin Nelson and Nathan Basenti, and to all of our incredible members for your contributions today and working and laying the foundation for future Indigenous students to build on. And to the Office of Campus Sustainability, the Office of Native American Advancement and Tribal Engagement, the Agnes Nelms Hari Foundation, to CAPLA, and to all of our campus partners who provided the support needed to make today possible. This symposium exists because of collective effort, community, and care. Thank you for being here, and I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Johnpaul Jones.
Let's see, let's get set up here. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here. And it's an honor to be talking with these two Native American people. We've known each other for a long time, and they do wonderful work. And it was a good experience today with the students. And your mother gave me inspiration for the National Museum of American Indian when I led that for 12 years. And those 5 things she wrote in the very beginning inspired me and all the team to do that. So thank you. Hey, I I grew up in Okmulgee, Oklahoma. You know where that is? South of Tulsa. And it was there was a place that went up to about 12, and then I got moved with my parents to Stockton, California, and then my parents separated, and 3 of us, my 5 sisters, 3 of us and myself had to go live with my dad, and it kind of broke the family up, and that was going on a lot in this country, and it wasn't so much the Indian schools. There was what followed that was some mix up of things. But one thing I got out of it was a good education. I got a really good education. And so my home for the last 58 years has been on an island west of Seattle. And my practice has almost the entire time been with Indigenous people of the central Puget Sound area. And I wanted to kind of connect you to what your theme is. And let's see if I can get this right. Which one advances it? Up. Let's just do that. Yeah. You ever heard of this man, Billy Frank? Well, if you lived in the Northwest, you know a lot about his family, and they fought the fish wars. That their legal right, that's treaty rights, they gave up a lot of their land, and to be able to live where they wanted to live, and they had fishing rights. And they didn't really get to, the fishing rights were sort of taken away slowly by the state of Washington and the federal government. And a long story, they ended up winning with a Bolt decision, okay? Well, Billy was a young man when that all started, and he was one of the major elders that have influenced me over the life. And I wanted to just read this to you because I think it fits to what we're talking about. He says, "I don't believe in magic. I believe in the sun and the stars and the water and the tides, the floods and the owls, the hawks, flying the river, running the wind. They're measurements. They tell us how healthy things are, how healthy we are, because we and they are the same." And I think that's just what we've been talking about here for this seminar is that, and that's it. Yeah. I've used these slides off and on a lot, and they have to do with we have some unique views, you know, that encompass, like, up in the Northwest, the Raven and helped us get out of the clams, and it's brought us into the real world, Also, in the Northwest, done by the same artist up in Vancouver, BC, is this canoe. And, we're all in this canoe together. The spirits, the animals, each of us, all of that. We're all in that canoe together. So they're wonderful pieces of sculpture that express what I think is really important. And it's elders. The Pacific Northwest is an interesting place. The fellows on the left are Makah Indians, and they represent tradition, and the lady on the right did the same thing. But tradition and contemporary Native American Indigenous worldviews, these are words that you guys have written, center around respecting natural resources and values of biological resource diversity, of local systems, and respect all beings, both human and non-human. Our elders ask us to respect their ancient ways and beliefs. And that happens in all the Indigenous communities, okay? And but they don't expect us to stand still, okay? You know what I mean by that? They expect us to advance and not just be something that's you read about or go to museums to see about. They expect us to advance, so in a modern way. So I wanted to show you some, before I get on too far, I wanted to show you some pictures of the kind of people I work with. This is Athabascan in central Alaska. And while there was a big architect and we were working with a big architect, they formed this committee to kind of make sure Native culture was ingrained in this Native clinic. And what you see, there are elders, you see artists, You see a preacher, it's the woman with the dark coat on in the back, and some of the native doctors that are on the staff and all that. And the committee was formed to kind of help guide the experienced technical architects that were really good at medical facilities. And I just wanted to show you that's one type of Native people that happens. Another one is like this was with the Sanadiyas Chumash tribe on the left. That's the male spiritual leader. Okay, and there was also a female spiritual leader, and we were, as designers, we were expected to interact with them. It was really a wonderful experience, and I learned so much. On the right-hand side is a native artist. She lives on the Columbia River, and we did a project that encompassed uh, something with Maya Lin and some other people working on a memorial. And we insisted that she be involved. So working with native artists at the same time with, spiritual leaders at the same time with the all the people in the community really helps you stay on course and not get too far away from that. And then I want to show you this one. I told a story about the ones on the left, the Southern Utes. They called us up. We were just finished all the what they call design development drawings, and they called us up and they said, "Well, we're going to fly up to Seattle and we want to talk to you about something." And I said, "Well, what do you want to talk to us about?" And he says, "Well, when I get there, we'll talk about it." So they flew up, and I was all worried. Oh my God, we really needed to do this job, and we really loved it. And we got there, and he looked at the drawings, and we were sitting at this big table, and he said, "Flip the building." We want to go back to entrance on the east. And my staff went, "Ah." They said, "Well, isn't it easy when you got the computers, to flip it?" Well, no, it is, but then you got everything that goes with it's got to switch to. But I said, it's right. It's the right thing to do, And the other thing is, I wanted to show these two women on the right there, because oftentimes we'll be working with the Native community, and we're all together. And this happens in non-Native communities too. And in this one, the men got to speak first and do all the talking. And the women were really polite and waited. Okay. And so we missed half the really good information we needed as architects to be able to design something. And so the next time I met with them a month later, I said, "We're going to meet with the women by themselves. We're going to meet with the men by themselves. And then a month later, we'll meet back together and all that." Well, we learned so much from that, doing that, just a little simple thing that it really gave us a lot of tools and things to use as the architects. And then a lot of you have seen this from me. This is from my Choctaw heritage. It's a forward world approach. How do you engage these diverse communities and diverse people in the Native community work? And it's the same thing in non-Native, but there's a lot of diversity in how people think about things. And the way I do it is I get them talking about this diversity framework. And I talk about the natural world, and that isn't just trees, and it's everything from dirt, water, the seasons. Just talk with them about it. They'll tell you what it means to them. The same with the animal world. We talk about the animal world. Up where I live in the Northwest, it's obvious that totem poles and all that, but there's a lot you get from it. Do the same thing with the spirit world. I don't mean church. I mean just what it says right there: renew, creation, all of that stuff. I was doing a project that there was this rock that was as big as this whole end of the auditorium. That spirit of that rock was speaking to all of us, and we had to pay attention to it. And it ended up we made everybody walk by that rock before they go in the building. That rock was alive, it's alive, and it tells you a lot about its ancient times and all that. And then the last one is the human world of storytelling, but it's mainly around what I call transfer of knowledge. You'll see a project I'm going to show you from the Santa Ynez Chumash, and it's a cultural center, and they've been around for 20,000 years plus. Okay, they thought they were only there for 10, but everybody's now they're finding more, and they've been there for 20,000. So it's probably going to double here pretty soon. So Native people have been here a long time. They've learned a lot, and that's really important to kind of go through and go over that. So I centered 3 projects, quick ones I'll show you. One is around architecture and landscape design. Okay, working with the Chumash, the first thing they did was they took us to a lot of their sacred sites that were not the most sacred ones, but sacred that they could let us go to. You know, like the Yellow Mountain off in the distance. And then they wanted to make sure that they took us to some of their cave paintings. They talked to us about their food, about the things that bloom, the times you, that was the first thing they started talking to us about. You know, it was before we even started the museum and all of that. So, one more here. And after we worked for a long time and came up with a design, this was the lower part of their site. And it's all, they wanted the landscape to you look out at the landscape. The spiritual leader said, we're the guardians of the Western portal. So you have to face this to the Western portal, okay? What he talked to me about was it's to the west, to sunset. That's it. We're the guardians of that. Tribes used to come from all over the country, from the Rocky Mountains, to come to the Western portal to conduct cultural business. So anyway, so this building, this museum faces that way. Right, it's open now, and they had an event. People are sitting on that terrace right there, and they're looking out to the Western portal, and they come out and sang to them and talk to them about their history and their culture and all that. And like non-native and native people get to go there for dinners. Now, one thing I wanted to show you as an architect, everything we first saw was, they said, oh, they have these kind of small huts, kind of things that they lived in and all that sort of stuff. They didn't do architecture. They didn't do architecture. We were at one of the museums looking at baskets and talking, and this archaeologist says, oh, no, they used to do these big structures that were 30, 40, 50 feet in diameter, 50, 60 feet tall. And that's where they conducted a lot of their ceremonies in. And then they would tear them all down and go back to the smaller things in their communities. And then they all lived by a stream where they needed the fresh water. And so it's just this wonderful thing that you learn that they did architecture. So as architects, we decided, let's pick up on that, so that the first thing you walk into is you walk into one of their structures. That's it. Call it an op. But it's the different experience. It's all lit up because we turn on all the lights, but when you walk in, it's dim, just like it would be in the old days. And there's 10 levels going up, and the spiritual leader said they have to have 10 levels in this. He says, I'll only reach 7 all in my lifetime. You know, I'll never reach the 10 levels and all that. So if somebody the tribe, they know that, and they walk into this building, they know that it tries to do in a modern way represent their culture and their physical architecture. And the center part is what happens in the season round, year round. We sit down with them, and we made this chart that said what happens at various seasons of the room, and we got that on the floor. So the first thing the visitor gets is that experience and all that. So then there's the great exhibit hall. They can go in and get this all interpretive, and it's really terrific. It talks about the condor, and it talks about their underworld, the overworld, and all that. And anyway, I'll just keep moving here. And there's a stream that goes through the whole thing. Now, where did that come from? California's kind of dry. You're wasting water doing a stream. Well, their casino and hotel recycles all their water. That's You can drink it afterwards, but nobody will drink it. And so they just dump it in the stream next to them, which hardly runs at all. And they said, "Oh, take all you want." So we put a pipe in, brought it all the way up to our site, and it runs through the whole site. And then those plants have all grown up now, and there's full of frogs and butterflies and hummingbirds coming through, and it's really wonderful. So you get the experience, not just the architectural experience, you get other things that go with it. Oh, wrong one. Okay, so now in terms of active, what I call environmental active planning, we did a project in the state of Washington that's has a lot to do related to the Northwest Canoes. And it's the state of Washington was wanting to, the red line is the existing Mukilteo Clinton ferry boat. And the traffic backed up all of into the community down below. So the community was putting a lot of pressure on the state to move the terminal to give a lot of more parking because a lot of people go this way. But this is called Point Elliott, all that in a kind of a gold or orange color. And that's where the treaty was signed for 9 tribes in that area, all the way from the Lummies up north, all the way down to the Muckleshoots around Seattle. And it was an important place to them. And it was always a summer place that they came to fish because the water off this is the best water in Puget Sound for food, for salmon food and all that. So they would come here during the summer and dig for clams and hunt fish and go from there. And there was a midden there that was almost a mile long. It was about 12 to 15 feet deep at one end and about 8 at the other end. And so the tribes knew what the state was going to do. And they said, "There's no way you're going to build anything here. Those Stay away from that. Do not disturb that midden." And so there was a lot of definition determined. And the tribe said, "If you hire Jones and Jones, we might work with you to figure this out." So, all of a sudden I got a call from the ferry boat planning people, and they said, "Okay." So next thing we know, we're working on this project, and we just started working with all the tribes. We went to every one of the tribes. 7 are still pretty active. And we went to them, and we couldn't deal with the council because they only do government to government. So they wouldn't deal with us as our planners. So we dealt with all the people just below that were head of fish, head of water quality, all that. And we did that at every tribe. And they told us some things. And out of that working thing and working sessions, we found out that there was a lot of things we could do. But they emphasized 3 very important things: water, sustainability, what need to be water focused, and whatever's done there needs to be sustainable, and then it needs to be respectful of our treaty rights. And then the message needs to come across: we're still here. We haven't gone away. So that was the 3 messages that were the key things. Here's one, if you can just take a look at. And it was kind of wonderful to do that. And then eventually it was all put together in a package of this, and it was given to another architect, and they did a good job based on what we learned, and it's all happened. And people say, "Well, how did you build over the remains?" Well, because they have to have storm drainage. They have to have water and all that sort of stuff. And if you run, you have to dig into at the same level, you have to dig into the, so we put I think it was 8.5 feet. But we put down a membrane first that kept the water from going any further. And we've set that all up so it runs, and they put all those pipes in that. So we didn't have to disturb. The tribes were very happy because we didn't have to disturb the midden at all. And then everything was put on top of that, and it works like a charm. And they wanted to make sure that their message about the water and everything was, and that was all put in. So that's what I call environmental activism. It takes place a lot in the Northwest. I was doing a work in Florida in the Panhandle, and I said, well, it was for an environmental group too. And I said, well, who do we have to go to? What's the tribe we have to talk to? And they said, what? We don't talk to tribes here. Okay. And it hasn't changed much in that way. But the reason that you have to talk with the tribes in the Northwest is because the Army Corps of Engineers for the state of Washington said, we won't give you a permit if you do anything by the water unless you get approval from the tribe that is next to that water. So the whole Seattle waterfront has just been redone. It's really lovely what's been done. But they had to get the Muckleshoot's approval. And the Muckleshoots got some names. They named the waterfront, and they did a bunch of other stuff. They got a healthy environment and got rid of all the stormwater is taken away and treated. And it's just all those kind of things comes out of doing something like that. Okay, now this is the last thing. Then I'll be done. Aren't those something? Those are 24 feet tall, 24 feet square, and they're done on tilt-up concrete walls. And they're Andrew Morrison, who's a Northwest Native painter. He painted those with help from an Indian school, urban Indian school, because urban Indian kids were getting beat up at getting in fights in all the schools. So they feel that for a temporary thing for many years, 10 years, they needed a place. So they took over an old school, and they helped Andrew paint these. He got them busy doing it. And so there's, that's Chief Self, Seattle's named after when he was an elderly man. That's Chief Joseph there. There's 4 of them. And then there's 6 or 7 other big, beautiful ones. Well, there you get some idea. Andrew was a street tagger, would go out and tag and paint things. He was very good, but he got diverted into doing these kinds of things. And he's a very successful artist now, but he wanted to save these. And it took a big effort. We had to convince the Seattle Public Schools to pay for it, because they're going to tear those old buildings down, old school, and build 2 new a middle school and a grade school. And what we ended up doing after working with everybody for a long time, there's Andrew. And we took them and took the plans from the architects and showed where they could put the big ones, which are on the bottom. And you can see where they were 1 to 4 they're on the new gymnasium. Then the rest of them that are not, I'm not showing them all right now, are scattered throughout the whole project. And so the school is now not just a native, there's a lot of native kids that live in there in that community, and they go to school there. But we saved this art, this native art. And I thought it was important that's a business thing you can do. You can get involved in that. It doesn't have to be just architecture or just planning. It's just, let's work with the artists and do stuff, get things saved and all that. And so basically these little models, we had to figure out how to take these concrete walls that were a foot thick, rebar all in them. We had to saw cut them, keep them upright. And we just got some house movers and they put them on the rollers and strapped them down. And then we bundled it all up to protect it. And we moved it and stored it on the site. And they built a school. and we moved it back over, and it's part of the structure of the school, and they put them up, and then Andrew came in and touched everything up, and it's a success. The community loves it, the native community loves it, and it's a very nice thing. And they thought, well, let's do something on the inside, because the kids weren't gonna know, why is this here? Why are you saving this? That sort of thing. So that in each school, there's a whole bunch of things like this, panels that we worked up and about the whole thing. So, and then, the one reason why I think the artist thing is really important, I always use this, the Chief Dan George. Here I have Billy Franks saying, I don't believe in magic. It's an indicator, science-based. There it is. That's what it tells us. Well, Chief Dan George said, the beauty of the trees, the softness of the air, the fragrance of the grass speak to me all the way down to what he says at the very end, and my heart soars. That's a poetry that exists in the Native community. There's poets that come across in working sessions, and if you can engage the artists and the poets in this, as well as the people that are kind of making sure it gets done technically right, you can really turn out something nice. And this is a Athabasc, this Yupik Eskimo man. People understand that. He's singing about this. And just, he's very happy. Very nice. So, thank you. Okay.
Who is really? Find this. This one?
No, next one.
This one?
Yeah, no, next one.
This one? Ah, thank you. Okay. It's, okay, wait.
Okay, we're PowerPoint challenged here already.
Totally. Here, so I need to go. Oh my gosh.
Minumo Kimam Keriba. I'm Ted Jojola, and I find this fascinating, the fact that our most senior elder gets to go first. Usually stage it so that the superstar goes at last, so everybody stays around. But it kind of reminds me of many of the kind of community events where many of the protocols for feast day is that the elders get to eat first, and then the children last. And I always think that I mean, I have to uphold that protocol and stuff, but I always think that it should be the children eating first, because they're the ones that are going to be nurtured in order to assume and take our roles. So I just find this really interesting that this kind of protocol was used. So the elder ate first. So elder in training, I'm gone beyond that. I am now emeritus at the School of Architecture and Planning, and now called a working retiree, which means that I only get a quarter of the salary to work twice as hard to pay myself. But what I'd like to do is essentially give you the kind of new stories that we've been developing with regards to thinking about how we think about contemporary architecture, and in particular, staging it from the standpoint of bringing voice and bringing that kind of passion into how it is that we imagine this journey has occurred in terms of 7 generations planning. So this evening, what I'd like to do is essentially share with you exhibit that we just finished, a major exhibit that was 10 years in the making. Myself as lead curator and co-curator with Lynn Paxson, who is also emeritus and retired as well too. in order to put together over 10 years of effort in order to tell the story as framed from the standpoint of contemporary Pueblo architecture. And when we say contemporary Pueblo architecture, we're talking about Indian self-determination, 1975, and how it is that we had to sort of formulate and build our own intelligentsia from the ground up and have our own Pueblo people represented as the designers and the planners and the practitioners that have actually self-determined how it is that we responded to these elements of federal policy that has shaped much of what has occurred within our own communities. So this exhibit is called Restoring Our Hard Places because we wanted to develop a narrative from our perspective, our voice, and we also wanted to get away from the sort of nomenclature that has inadvertently been imprinted on us from the colonizer viewpoint, because the Hart Place is known by and large as the Plaza, but the Plaza is a Spanish variant. The Hart Place is what it is that we see as being essentially the soul and where it is then that we manifest our own notion of who it is that we are in terms of time and place and change. So the story begins with creation and emergence. And in that process of thinking about how it is that our ancestors began to give us original instructions about how it is that we moved in the world, then the story is about how we emerged from the center of the earth and then came to what is the fifth level. And in that fifth level is this very thin membrane that we walk on right at this point. And the instruction that they gave us then was to basically begin to explore the land and do it in a very definitive way that essentially made us learn. And that journey is metaphorically represented within not just archetypes, but also within our structures. So this is part of ancestral Kiva in the Salinas region. I love this because you see those 5 gradations that speak to that landscape that we just saw previously. And it then represents our relationship of how it is that we came from that earth, moved upwards in a very deliberate fashion, and then came into our notion of how it is that we're human. So those ancestors then took these original instructions and then moved in time and space in a very deliberate way. And you see this in this archetype of the spiral, and you see the directionality that's attached to that. And those instructions basically said, go to the 4 corners of the world, and then when you complete that journey, then you actually begin it anew. But when you move it into this kind of 3-dimensional realm, what occurs is you see this kind of spiral and this what I call like a whirlwind or bed spring phenomenon, where you then move physically to the 4 corners of the world, but that in that process you learn about living. And in that living, then you elevate what is your collective wisdom. And that transformational knowledge then is what brings you back to your center place, but you physically return to that place in the center. But as a people, your consciousness is elevated, and that's how we sustain, that's how we invent, and that's how then we take the knowledge that we've gained and not take it back literally, but then change it in a way then that helps us in terms of our resiliency and sustainability. So that journey is so key to how it is then that we grew our sense of awareness. So the next part that I'd like to show you is an animation that we created as part of this exhibit in order to actually show how that journey was accomplished as based on our story of how we came to be as Pueblo people in the Southwest. So I'm going to show this for you all. Assuming that it runs, there it goes. So this animation was created by Joseph Erb, who's Cherokee, has worked a long time in animation and language. And the narration is done by Conroy Chino, who is from the Pueblo Acoma. So in a way, this was really illustrative of how it is that we wanted to really introduce this notion of how it is that we acknowledge our original instructions, but still carry those and help to inform how it is that we do our current buildings. So this was obviously an exhibit that has a lot of passion and love behind it in terms of how it is that we really wanted to represent the way that our new planners and architects who are Pueblo, we actually featured over 20 of them and actually 5 of them have already passed on. So it's both a fragile as well as an emerging kind of community, and that all of them essentially then have really, in a way, been inspired not only to take these instructions, but to put them into a particular way of putting them into a story. And what we wanted to do was not so much talk about what it is that ordinarily architects tend to assume, which is that they're the artists, they're the creators, they're the innovators, as much as talking more about their role in terms of facilitators, facilitating how it is that they can work with the communities in order to then model and basically respond to these transformations of policy, beginning with the Indian self-determination, but as you can see also with the impacts of HUD, the Indian Education Act, the Native American Graves and Repatriation Act, Indian Gaming and Regulatory Act. And all of these then were examples of how it is that they began to formulate and build these kinds of types to respond to this. So what I'd like to do next is show another example of how it is that we actually begin to stage this in terms of these kinds of stories and these types of representations, and how it is that we actually mass this in terms of the exhibit itself. So here's a short video of that space that we created for this exhibit. So from there, then we also began to actually deconstruct how it is that we thought about these kinds of forms, and began to develop a way in order to tell the stories and the process of Indigenous design. And one of the buildings that we highlighted was the Haku Museum, which is a direct outcome of the Indian Game and Regulatory Act. And every part of the building is situational in terms of how it is that they actually took instructions within the community, and then how it is that the building itself is basically metaphorical about all the elements of their own values, their systems, their lives, their art, their expression, and did this by creating an interactive, immersive theater that was 270 degrees in the round, using the technology that we have now in order to be able to tell this narrative from the voices of the designers themselves. And this production was done by Aniseed Productions, which is a fabulous company that comes out of Washington, D.C., that worked with the community in order to be able to develop this pretty complex exhibit. So this just gives you an idea of what that space looked like. So there's a panel there that you can select different types of rooms. And within each of those rooms, then there is someone who can actually address and talk about what is the meaning of what it is that you actually are looking at. So
Sound.
Saturday. There, my mom can't believe the great Reed steps into the board.
So that was the narrative, and it was really intended in order to represent a way in order to bring those voices to bear, but also to frame it from a contemporary context of how it is that architecture is self-determination, and that the key variable in that is having our own people then go and build that vision as the foundation of our ancestral knowledge from which we inherited and which we continue to assist in terms of the notion of resiliency and sustainability. So with that, thank you. And I'm going to pass it on to Wanda.
Johnson, that's fun. Eventually, Jenny, feed the pumps. Thanks for coming.
What's up? Like,
little line on because
not the way from the late in the year. You've got only a 15.9 points per game from inspections.
yeah.
To get over it past the play forward earlier. Was had
I don't know how to escape. I just took it back.
quick. Everybody's got to keep going. You're going. God has to walk.
Let me see. There's one more. Can I?
Yeah.
Oh,
That's me.
we need. Okay, we need that one. All right. The rest. Okay, and then I'm going to do this so it disappears, so it's not on the screen.
Okay, but I
Yeah,
gotta
it
do
just
the
needs to go
screen share.
full. Yeah. We ran into someone else's meeting, I think.
Okay, wait a minute. No.
Drew's right in the middle of my screen there. Can we put the little? Right. Yeah. Okay. There we go. I think we got it.
Turn off.
Oh.
Ooh. Maybe a little much. Oh, geez.
That's awesome. All right, we're doing this all in the last speaker,
Sorry, guys.
getting everything fixed here.
All right, there we go.
Awesome. And a little bit of pressure now that I know that I'm the final speaker and probably the baby of the group, not even close to eldering. Nobody move, don't leave. I don't want to lose the momentum that has already been set. But really, I just want to start by saying that these are two of my biggest mentors. Ted Hola created the IDPI over at UNM, and that was what spurred my interest in creating a similar body at ASU where I teach, and we created the Indigenous Design Collaborative. So big thank you to you. And of course, Johnpaul Jones, a leader, one of the pioneers here of Indigenous architecture in the US, and has absolutely been instrumental. So I thank you for letting me go as the finale here. But yeah, the main show has already passed. So. All right, but I want to share a couple of things before I start. So life-centered design, it was funny, we were debating this term because everyone's starting to use this term life-centered design. And Tammy Eagleball, who now teaches with me, who's the first Native American woman to be registered in Canada, she was like, life-centered design. She's like, that's just Indigenous design. So let me read you the definition because it kind of tripped me out. And so now we're trying to take that word and kind of bring it back into use. And I just checked the definition, and it's a sustainable regenerative approach that expands on human-centered design by considering the impact of product systems, architecture, on all living things, ecosystems, and the planet. So back to Johnpaul Jones, he had that wonderful diagram of the different worlds. All of that is in life-centered design, right? It's all integrated and part of that. So I call it life-centered design. It's a big word, but I think it's something that we want to lean into in this work, absolutely. As you can see, I'm a member of Satellite Cree Nation. I'm a very far away from home. I came here in 2016, so it was about 10 years ago, and I was doing a keynote. I was living in LA, teaching at Woodbury in the architecture program, but they offered a job because they were looking to kind of bring the theoretical side. I started teaching at ASU, and then I quickly realized that if I don't actually also practice, so I can show people what it is to do this type of work, not only from a theoretical basis, but also in practice, I'm going to lose the momentum of this. And so as hard as it is to weave both practice and teaching, I feel like it's absolutely necessary. So the other thing I wanted to highlight is, well, just to mention that what we do in our practice often ends up in the classroom. So I bring what I'm learning, and we are learning constantly. Robin is here. She works, she's a graduate from U of A, and she works at our office in Tempe. And so what we do in practice comes back into the classroom and vice versa. What we learn in the classroom, we practice a lot with AI, we make theories, we make frameworks. We're trying to make it, distill it into something that's really approachable and understandable by a larger group. I am of the belief that I'm Canadian, and there's only, when I was registered, I think I was number 8 in the list of Indigenous architects. It's not a whole lot. And I think now there's about 20 or so. That's not enough. We have like 600 nations in Canada, plus Inuit, plus Métis. That's a lot of work to be done, right? And as Ted Hoholu so eloquently talked about, this is our sovereignty, and this is really important, this work. And so I've been on a trajectory of trying to dive into two-eyed seeing. How is it that we can bring the champions and the advocates who may not be Indigenous to help us? And for that to happen, I feel like we need to kind of blow it apart, almost unsilo the complex, interrelated mind of all the things that are all tied together, unsilo it so that people can see it and understand it, and then put it back together. So that's what I'm in the process right now, is kind of breaking things down and trying to really understand it and articulate it so I can share it out more into the world. 2 more things before I begin. I wanted to just share with you today, I really want to touch on 2 basic things, which one really relates to what Ted was talking about, the sovereignty, but I termed it cultural resilience. I think this world, as Ted mentioned, it touches so many aspects of Indigenous people's lives, from the way they want to, who they are right now, because change is so imminent in our communities that culture is definitely living and alive and moving. And so I want to touch on cultural resilience and that the power of that, how important architecture is to that process, and planning and design and all sorts of design. But I also want to talk about creativity that comes out of this work, or creative imagination. So I'm going to touch on a bit of imagination. And again, this is really because I really want people to see what can happen when you begin to start to unsilo this topic and take it apart and look at the little pieces in there. There's so much richness. And I see, both of the presentations that have gone before have started to sprinkle that beautiful richness in there. All right. So last thing, when the reason why I got so inspired, I don't know if anyone knows the backstory, but I went on a backpacking journey, met 2 girls at the local hardware store, not from my neighborhood, but from another neighborhood, that were going backpacking around the world, or they were starting in Australia. And I got this amazing just push that I needed to do that too. And I started off, I was supposed to be gone for 6 months, and I came back 7 years later after visiting about 40 or so countries. And the reason why it took so long is that I finally noticed there's culture visible everywhere around the world, except for back home. And I needed to do everything I possibly could to make culture visible. All right. How do I move this forward? We got all the kinks out here. There we go. All right. So the work that we do centers the local, centers the place, centers culture and all living systems within. We are actively in the field of design trying to productively disrupt architecture. Through that work, we employ the redesign of products, such as the application of patterns or forms in new contexts. We look for new uses for traditional crafts. Can a beadwork pattern create the inside of a wall? We also ask a lot of questions through this work. Can we bring forward the belief or the value systems from our communities? Can clan animals live on walls? We find that the Indigenous process, the design process, and I'll share with you our placekeeping framework, the Indigenous design process creates a continuous stream of cultural contact, the seeds of inspiration. And the question I ask, with a push toward two-eyed seeing of bringing this to make it accessible to non-Indigenous and Indigenous people alike, can we help others, designers, planners, architects, also see that local and find those seeds of inspiration to inspire new ways of designing that guarantee novel ways of doing things? And what if in that process, we were able to preserve culture, creating spaces for cultural practices to emerge not only in our communities, but also in our urban environments? What you're seeing is a large performing arts center that was designed with a lodge in mind, because a lodge is something welcoming, and they were trying to make it not so to broaden the audience of who goes to see the theater. And so we had to engage a whole group of people within a city, Indigenous people who typically don't go to the theater. And I had to ask them why. Why is it? And it was about the hoity-toityness of these environments. And I said, well, what could we do to make it feel more welcoming and more inviting? And so these are the conversations that we undertake to do this work. This is the outside of the lodge, the Performing Arts Lodge, and we didn't do the outside, but it's now, the new design is in the shape of a star blanket. It's absolutely beautiful, and it definitely is visible culture. And so I want to talk today about that beauty of the creative imagination that comes through Indigenous work and through an indigenized process. In anthropology, there's a concept called cultural ecology, and it's been used to address the interrelationship between humans, culture, and environments. The term creative ecology describes an approach to studying the multiplicity of interrelated elements between people, practices, environment, with emphasis placed on the local environment. In this way of thinking, place is both a geographical location, and through embracing local culture, it becomes a repository of culture. It brings the culture back alive. So this is the work that we're trying to do. We're trying to synthesize a wide range of context information, designing in place to really bring newness to the work. For us, artifacts can be understood as bearers of expression and bringing forward human values and meanings. They embody knowledge, practices, and modes of living that, for one reason or another, are regarded as meaningful and culturally significant. Their modes of making, their use, and their presence in our lives teaches us and perpetuates the continued creation of meaningful material culture. Without these spaces, you can see a gathering space that we put in this design. It's right across from the Ottawa Parliament in Canada. And without these places to gather in our cities, we lose so much. We lose material culture, which perpetuates the loss of associated knowledges and practices, and with them, the loss of sustainability, which we talked about at the opening. The term radical reinvention, it's a book that came out of a book that I was recently reading. It describes any new initiative to bring to life culturally significant design, products, or practices, while aiming to retain or even enhance the values associated with it. So radical revitalization. The values that come to life can be social, they can be historical, aesthetic, but the values are always in flux, and change and evolution are embedded in this act. In this act, cultural practices are upheld. Here you see symbols in an arbor, an exterior arbor, that have very deep meaning to the people of this community. But at the same time, in this student center, we were also able to bring norms of collective eating. The students wanted to cook a roast together on campus, which is not typically done on a campus, but because breaking bread and being together is so important, through that act of collective eating, identity, who they are as people, what they believe in becomes preserved. What you see, the words on the tall wooden structures that are dividing the room, these are all the local greeting languages and all the local languages. So we're always trying to sneak language inside the architecture. Here, a room is arranged for storytelling or social gatherings. And we can also think about furniture. This is a table situated in ASU's library that was a sketch that came from an artist, Jeffrey Fulwilder. And we took a sketch on a napkin and turned it into a product. He's standing there, this wonderful artist in the yellow. There's Jeffrey. And so for us, working with artists, we also really believe strongly in working with artists. We're doing a large grant right now for the Mellon Foundation, working all with artists, because our elders are getting tired and we can only ask them so many more questions. And so what we've built a practice on is let's ask the artists, because they have a lot of energy, they have a lot of ideas, and then we'll go and validate it and make sure that the elders give us the thumbs up. And that's been the process we are using to be able to kind of save the energy for our elders. All of this work is based in tradition. And unfortunately, tradition, in the era that I was educated in architecture school, tradition was taboo. Misconceptions with its, it had an association with the past, negative connotations. The word vernacular was completely taboo in the era that I was educated in architecture. And I since learned, as I started to study, that modernity, that kind of movement that happened, starting in Europe and quickly permeating in architecture circles around the world, it had to reject tradition and the long established and deep-rooted modes of living and acting that tradition represented. And there was something called the Futurist Manifesto written by Marinetti, and it was published in 1909. And this was literally the pinpoint of this moment, where it was an outspoken condemnation of the accumulated knowledge, learning, and wisdom that had been handed down from past generations. I think we know better now. I always use the term walking backwards into the future. I know we're going this way, but I walk with my eyes toward what has gone before. There's learnings there. But this notion of modernity and what it did in the field of architecture is that it helped spur designers' views that all that wealth of knowledge that had been handed down was essentially irrelevant. And this is where I entered architecture school after 7 years around seeing really cultural architecture and very visible culture around the world. So I was completely at odds when I went in there. And they told me in the architecture school that I had to create these little white boxes because that was the fashion right now. And I was like, I've been to 40 so countries, not to have attitude, but nobody's living in little white boxes. There's bamboo and there's curves and there's earthly materials and there's all this way cooler stuff that's out there than these white little boxes. So I was trying to productively disrupt from what I knew, right? My mother grew up on the res with no running water in these, these kind of shacks that we squeeze ourselves into on the res. And then I see all this in the world and I was like, where is that disconnect? So through this work, we have come, and Robin's with me on this, we work on this every day. We have come to learn that tradition is very much about the future. It enables continuity. It extends the contextualized, embodied knowledge, practices, and values to the coming generations. Traditions are the human practices whose organizing purpose is to preserve what is valued beyond the lifespan of any single individual or generation. Traditions are collaborative, multi-generational enterprises devised by human beings to satisfy the deep human impulse to preserve what is valued. When we do our work, there's a number of vital questions that we ask. And I really admire Johnpaul Jones, the diagram that you had up with those 4 quadrants in the worlds, the natural, animal, human, and spirit world. I love that. And I think in some ways we are also trying to do the same. We're always developing these, unsiloing it to be able to put it back together. But we always ask a couple of questions. How is the space used? Can we bring back cultural protocols, cultural practices, cultural norms? We call it lifeways. Secondly, who does the space represent? What is it that they want to project now in this wildly changing time that we're in? And that's the identity piece. And then thirdly, should this space take it further? Not all spaces need to, but some spaces lean into ways of knowing the worldview. Not every, but cultural centers, education centers always kind of lean into that ways of knowing. And so those are the main three questions. But seeds of inspiration emerge through this practice and bring the local to life. Through all of that collecting of information as we ask those questions, we also share as much as we can. So I want to share our process, and I really do believe that the more that we share, the more that we can bring advocates and champions to this work, because as I learned in Canada, there's 20 or so of us. We cannot do all the projects, and we need help from everyone, and that's part of the discourse in our practice is to really expand the creativity and have everyone join us for this work. So let's talk about what brings creativity, and this is kind of the last point I want to make before I share with you our process. And I read a really interesting book called The Imagination Machine by Martin Reeves. And his main premise, the whole premise of the book, that was in order to increase imagination, and I'm guessing many of you are creatives in this room and designers in this room, that we have to create collusions with the world, bumping into the world as much as we can to drive the acceleration of ideas. And I'm guessing that's what happened when I went traveling. All the crazy ideas came to my mind. I couldn't get those ideas out of my head. But what the author says, he said, collusions arise when we push ourselves into the world to grow in understanding. Intendere, which is the Latin word meaning the root of intention. The author Reeves further states that something needs to kind of trigger or inspire us to take us out of that routine way of looking at things and enable us to refocus our attention, perception, and mental filters to see the world in another way. And according to Reeves, and I love this part of his book, he talked three things specifically that trigger your imagination. Number one, accidents, incidents that are irrelevant to what we're trying to achieve. Number two, anomalies, parts of a situation, story, or data set that are completely out of the ordinary. And number three, analogies, parallels that we can draw between concepts that suggest new possibilities. So accidents, anomalies, and analogies trigger imagination. And I do really believe that trip when I was traveling, I was triggered in the best possible way. And with that in mind, we created, I have to call this our imagination machine, because that's exactly what it does. We created something called the Indigenous Placekeeping Framework, and we purposely put ourselves in rooms, as you've learned also from Johnpaul Jones and Jojola. Those are the seeds of our inspiration, those conversations, though the research that we do, they all start to seed another level of creativity. They are found in land, in language, in memory, in form, in working with artists, and even in AI. We're working a lot with AI, and I will say that the images that you see behind these images that were created in Midjourney with AI. So we are actively also working with AI. We believe it's important. I don't think it's going anywhere, and I think if we don't speak to AI and tell it what's good and what's not good and what's kind of mediocre and what's bad, it'll be like us being left out of the history books last time, where we had an oral tradition and we were kind of disregarded or not regarded because we weren't in the books. So we're going to get in the big book of the AI brain, wherever that thing lives. So here's our framework, and I won't get too much into detail, but you can see on the top line, there's 5 phases to how we do our work. And again, we create these diagrams because we want other people to understand how we do this work. There's to me, no benefit to covet our process. So if you see in phase 1, Indigenized Startup, really that is mostly about establishing that roadmap. Are we doing engagement? Are we just doing, taking your reports and transcripts and meeting minutes and imagining through that? because you might not want to engage at this time. Are we extending our team? How do we measure success? So these are the critical things that come out in that phase. In the place-based research phase, I know it looks like a long process. It could be 1 day to 3 days, depending on how many tribes or nations are involved. We sometimes bring on our Indigenous archivist that will go in the back of the museum and get pre-colonial artifacts for us to begin to seed conversations in community. We found that that's a very useful tool to use to kind of keep the energies going. And then we have an engagement process. It looks very long there, but it could be a morning session. It could be a couple of 1-hour sessions. It is not onerous. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. Robin's in her first engagement session this month, is doing a phenomenal job. She's met with multiple communities, and you learn by doing it. And she's doing a fantastic job as well. The co-design phase, this is really just a transparent loop of iteration that we do with our communities. I call it collaborative design or co-design. And then finally, the storytelling, we added that piece in because we found out that once a project was done, it was not quite done. We had to celebrate, we had to feast, we had to bless the site. You know, there might be public things that we had to do to bring everyone on board. So there's a number of key steps. We also had to develop a set of deliverables, and I won't go into them, but they're more for when we work with cities and universities. They want to know exactly what these 3 days or 4 days of fees are going to be spent on, and it's essentially doing what you see on this map. To give you an example of what our place-based research looks like, so it's as simple as that. We have experienced design researchers in our firm, and we'll look at various things depending on the project and collect a little bit in order that we have cultural fluency before we go into the community. We used to hide these because we knew there's so much non-truths on the internet. And so we used to kind of put it in our back pocket. But I got caught a couple of times with it in my hand as my little cheat sheet. And we had the aunties take it out of my hand and start correcting it with a red pen, which I actually thought was really lovely. And so now we really humbly and with great shyness, because we know that there will not be everything will be correct in here. We give it to our communities if they would like to see it, knowing that there will be missteps. But this is what a couple of days of research will get you, and it sure helps the conversation. The other part that we are exploring right now, of course, as everyone has alluded to today, is traditional architecture. We are fascinated by how much learning there is to do in these traditional structures. And so the task that we have underway, and I have a deal with Routledge this year to produce a book for the fall, or a draft. But it's based on these traditional structures. And I have a scholar from the Hopi community. She's a PhD in architecture, maybe the first ever Indigenous PhD in as an architect in the US. I'm not sure. Brian Laban is her name, Dr. Brian Laban. And then also Greg, Iroquois architect from the North, who's doing his PhD. And so the three of us are working on interrogating our three precedents and coming up with an Indigenous model of design. Just to mention, this is our typical engagement process. They can be 2 people, they can be a whole community, they can be a complete town hall, but it's really, really important part of the work to validate everything that we learn through place-based research, but also make sure we're going in the right direction. This is the challenge that we're in right now, to try and unsilo all of that stuff that comes out during our engagement process. It's a lot. And given the Indigenous mind is often, there's many things that are weaved together in a holistic model. It's been tricky, but we're actually also getting AI to help us. So I free flow into AI with my speech to text. I add my papers that I've written, the stuff that's already published out there, and I help AI think through how we codify everything that comes out. As I mentioned before, the 3 questions that we're asking, this comes from Amos Rappaport. He's not in fashion at all in the field of architecture, but I lifted him out of the 1970s because he represents environmental behavioralist or environmental theory of how we live in our environment and how our environments affect us. And this is so relevant to how we do our work. And again, there are those questions. Who does the space represent? How is the space used? And should this space lean into Indigenous ways of knowing? To give you an example, this is what one sample project looks like. It was a campus building that a group of elders wanted to build on the edge of campus in a wooded area to be able to do ceremony. There's even a space to do a sweat lodge over here. It's in construction right now. It's nearing toward the end of construction. But I think what's most important is this part. We're uplifting through architecture all of those elements of the cultural layers that are important to the people of that place. So in the top level, you have the 7 grandfather teachings all on a pedal. This one is a special pedal because it represents east, so it's copper. On this layer are the cardinal constellations. So when you look up, the elders can teach through this building. There's a moon ring with the 13 moons. There's 10 clans inscribed on the outside in this sort of spiderweb structure. You can see them here. And then finally at the bottom, there's a ceremonial fire pit shaped, it ended up being the shape of a turtle. So everything was local and embedded to that culture. So just to summarize, the Indigenous placekeeping framework, that's our process. That's how we do our work. The Indigenous design triad, that's the way we're trying to silo, one of the ways we're trying to silo all that beautiful information that comes out of our communities. And this, we're going to try and wrap it all up in a book. So there's the preliminary table of contents. I'm going to be very busy this summer trying to write all of this into a coherent form. So with that, I would like to say thank you.
So we'd like to invite Wanda, Johnpaul, and Dr. Ted up to the front. We have a little bit of time left for questions, so. Testing. Testing.
Yep. The mediator.
All right, so does anyone have any questions for our speakers? I had one question from online. It was for you, Mr. Johnpaul. Someone was asking about the murals that were installed, and if in doing that project, what was done to ensure that those are maintained and kept over time? Like, how did you address that?
Hard work. The artist was ready to fight. Well,
It should be on. Yeah, it's on.
the artist was ready to fight everybody about it. And I said, calm down. Let's take it one thing at a time, you know. And that's so. That was good advice to him because he was a very emotional man. Does really good work. And the key thing is that we had to go to the school board of Seattle, big organization, and we had to convince them. So it was like we couldn't go in there saying you don't like it, you do, and yell at them. We had to just say, oh, blankety blank with them and kind of go at it slow and easy. Because if you start from that other kind of warrior position, sometimes, a lot of times it doesn't work. And so that was a slow process of actually finding out who controlled the money. And that was the school board. And then it was a matter of doing some publicity in the local papers about these murals, how beautiful they were, and having community meetings with the non-native community where these schools were going to be. Because they were just interested in getting a new school. They were tired of their kids having to be bused longer distance, so they wanted that. And so it was a matter of kind of calming down the artist and then slowly working through the process. And then people started responding in a positive way. The school district attorney got on our side. And their project managers got on our side. And I know they had enough money there because most of the school districts have to set aside a certain percentage of money for the art. So I said, we'll take it. And that kind of a thing. It just we had to be gently and so, but be aggressive at the same time. I don't know what else to tell you. He went to Rhode Island School of Design and came back to Seattle. Never really finished. Got involved in doing this project, and then I encouraged him to go on. So he went to University of California, Santa Barbara, got a teaching position and all that, and then he finished that and then moved on to doing other things. I told him to just keep advancing your work. The next thing I know is that there's a school in Seattle called it's a Catholic school, University of Seattle University, I think it's called. And and the next thing I know, the people that had seen his mural work and see that it was that on that project at school, they hired he was hired to do a big mural of just native students in the student union, and they're not all native people in that university. So he did these enlarged, blown up pictures. They're just really powerful. And then the last time I talked to him, he was painting at most reservations. There's a water tower, big brown water tower, and he was painting those things. So he's moving along and doing things. And so Seattle's very short on urban housing for Native people, and I've stayed away from it for 50 years because when I first got going, the BIA did terrible houses for people, and so I said I don't want to do that because you'll design something and then it'll get shit canned and that'll be it. So anyway, it's kind of like the first project was with the Chief Seattle Club, which is a Native urban organization, and they needed housing for about 80 or 90 homeless men and women in Seattle, live on the streets. So we did housing for them, and then we did another one because the city said you're helping clear the streets and make it a better place, and so they did another one. And I talked to Andrew and I said, okay, we need to have some big graphic on the side of this, and he painted these wonderful paintings. So he's still doing work, and but it was that just calming him down, going to it. My hair got grayer, but it worked. So that's what you can bring as the professional designers to help with that. So he did the work. So,
Question.
Hello, this is a question for all three of you, but I wanted to know if there was like a particularly challenging project that any of you worked on and what made it a success in the end, or if you decided whether or not it was a success, but sort of the challenges and what you did to overcome them.
They're all challenging. And it's always the case that, you think you can go breeze through it, and it takes years in some cases in order to actually see that kind of aspect completed in terms of how the community itself kind of situates itself. One of the really amazing aspects that we were able to document was part of the podcast that we do at our institute called Place Knowing, and this basically is a project that was the first American museum in Oklahoma, and that particular project took over 25 years in one of the worst environmentally impact site, which was actually oil field number one that was issued in 1920. So from the get-go, all of the agents were really lined up there in order to make this project fail. But it was really the perseverance of the 32 tribes there that basically took that and said, we'll take the worst of what it is that you've made and we're going to rematriate it and make it whole again. So yeah, I think that in particular is a really good example of how it is that we can overcome the kind of adversities that are thrown all along the way when you look at this kind of community development.
I don't know. When I think about challenges to the, yes, it's very true that there challenges exist with everyone, every project. But I think in the best case scenario, I think one of the aspects that to me is probably the most challenging of projects is community-based decision making and gaining consensus in whatever that looks like. And so there are tricks and tips to kind of guide your client group toward making decisions. And I'm sure what more great methods will be developed, but I think that is really learning how to bring people together and find that common pathway is a really good skill to learn.
I don't know. I don't think I had any of those kind of. There were challenges that my hair turned gray because my mother's hair turned gray young. My 5 sisters, their hair turned gray when they were young, so it wasn't the challenges that did it, just a lot of hereditary things, gray hair. And but sometimes like I was telling you about that Mokoteo Prairie, there was a planning effort, and everybody came to loggerheads. They just couldn't, do anything. And all it was saying, well, find out who you could deal with in each tribe and talk to them. And, the state wasn't trying to do that. They didn't have anybody to help them and help them. But near the end of the project, just before they all made a decision, the councils were saying, is this enough of an environmental project for us to get all behind it? Well, right there was a pier that went out about 400, 500 feet into the water. It was all made with creosote piles. It was all built during the Second World War to bring fuel into a naval base. And the state was just going to, they were just going to cut a little path through so their ferryboats could get between the piers and get over to the docks because they didn't want to have to pull out and do all of that. And I said, this is a win-win situation. If you take that out, the tribes are probably going to work with you because they, they want to clean it up. They want to make this wonderful fish place. And those piles were just leaking poison in the water. And it was really that one little thing. When I got those two together, the councils and the state, the state offered, well, okay, we'll take them all out. So that much more money. Everybody started cooperating because they knew that was the key thing. So it's trying to find a way, to kind of make these things work. And so.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Hard.
Thank you for you guys' nice, thoughtful, strong architectural words and train of thought. Um, so I'm a community master planner for my community of 10,000 people. And my question kind of centers around how would you approach integrating like all the indigenous aspects, tribal aspects from cosmology, traditional ecological knowledge, oral histories, ceremonial practices into a community master plan to de-assimilate, I guess, or uncolonize, but for making us resilient again, I guess. We used to be adapting, but now we're stuck.
And you want to do this in how many days?
Next week. Past my deadline.
I think, all of us have different processes and learning that we have accumulated in terms of the kind of work that we've staged. I was really impressed by Wanda's process model because in a sense, it just kind of shows in a way the types of complexities that come in, but there's a linearity there and there's a circularity there, which I think is really important to acknowledge in terms of how it is that we build consensus within our communities. We have our own take on that, which we call Places, which is an Indigenous planning toolkit. But within the formulation of that toolkit, that process essentially changes something fundamentally that we believe is one of our major tenets in terms of how we approach our projects. And that is to go in with this conviction that the people are beautiful already. So from that standpoint, then we build that conversation in order to engage community to talk about those things that they value, the things that they love, and then use that as the foundation for how it is that we begin to identify the challenges and use that as a strength for moving forward in terms of meeting their long-term objectives. So as Wanda had indicated, placekeeping is the kind of foundational concept that they've constructed. From our side, it's place knowing, because essentially with the conversations that we've had in our communities, and in particular, juxtapositioning that with what is the sort of Euro mainstream conversation around placemaking, they disavowed that and said, what's important to us is knowing the place because those are the things that we've inherited. And if we don't walk the land with our children, then we won't know the meaning of our ceremonies. We won't know our language. We won't know the plants. We won't know our understanding of the world, and all of these are central and key to our notion of cultural identity. So place knowing then is essentially the sort of way that we frame all of this in terms of bringing that centrality back, in terms of thinking about how it is that we stage our conversations within the future, using that 7 generations model of engaging all of our generations in that conversation.
I think we have time for one more question. Anything else? Zinnia.
This is a question for Wanda. I know you talked a little bit about using AI, and I was curious about how you use it. And from what I understand, there is a little bit of negative environmental impacts and how you maybe offset that, or yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And I should have brought it up because I know it always gets asked. And I'll be completely honest, my husband is an AI engineer for Amazon, which is why I know that this is not going away and we have to find a way to work with it because like an ostrich with his head in the sand cares about the technology and the techies that are out there building these systems. There's no turning back. I can tell you right now, he works 18 hours a day. He's just fascinated by this world. So I had to do my research because at the beginning, we had a lot of ethical arguments about sustainability, about ecology, about the land, about ethics, morality, who's leading this ship. And if it's a bunch of techies with their head in the sand, we're all in trouble. And I have since learned that there's a study by MIT that you should probably look up. They talk about AI as a trigger to developing better energy solutions worldwide. That yes, it's going to cause chaos, but it will also help us reach a solution. So there's really great literature emerging right now. And I do believe, humans are very smart beings. There's engineers already working on this, and I do believe we'll have a solution very, very quickly because it's not going anywhere. Great question.
Thank you. So, to end this evening, I'd just like you all to join me in a round of applause for the amazing speakers tonight. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Everyone have a wonderful night.